Greetings. This is the one you've known as Jesus the Christ. This is part 1 of chapter 4 of my book, Awakening Love. Love is not so much a feeling as a doing, and that doing is essentially a giving of any number of things. When you give love to someone, you're giving them your attention, respect, openness, compassion, gentleness, curiosity, care, and kindness. These are all components of love. When you give someone love, you stop all other doing and give them yourself. In that moment, you're open and willing to listen and respond to them from a place of love and wisdom. The most valuable gift you can give someone is love, and it's a gift that benefits the giver at least as much as the receiver. What does giving love look like? I said that love is a doing, but this doing often looks simply like receptivity and openness. The reason this is a doing is that your default is to not be open and receptive, but to be the taker, to try to get something from others. It might just be attention or admiration, but that's still an attempt to get something for oneself. So what you have to do to be with others from a place of love is to not do what the ego would do. This act of not doing is a choice, a doing. To love, you have to stop doing whatever you're doing and thinking, and then consciously choose to not do or say what is most automatic and conditioned. Then you have to choose to do what love would have you do. Give the person in front of you your full attention, willingly, patiently, and with kindness and goodwill. The greatest act of love is to be fully present to someone. Love receives others where they are. You allow them to be as they are. You accept them, listen to them, send love to them, and possibly at some point speak to them from your heart, the spiritual heart. Did you know that love has a voice? It does. It speaks to you intuitively, and then you give it a voice. You become a mouthpiece for love, for the divine. But this can only happen if you are in a state of love, receptive, open, kindly, and willing to be used in this way. Many who are in their egos want to be helpful, and so they try to help from that state of consciousness. Sometimes they're able to dip into love long enough to deliver its wisdom, but often what they offer comes from their own conditioned mind, which may not be helpful and may even be harmful. The mind just doesn't have the answers for the needs of the moment. Only the moment has these answers, and for that you have to be in the moment, not in your head. So many of the questions people have about their life and the things they struggle with are not the needs of the moment, but a problem their own egoic mind has created unnecessarily. The solutions to these so-called problems do not and will not arise from the moment. Instead, the egoic mind will offer its solutions. The mind creates the problem and then offers its own solutions. The only true solution that could arise from the moment to such problems would be the truth. Your own egoic mind is causing you to suffer. The egoic mind creates all sorts of imaginary problems, and imaginary problems have no real solutions. But that is for you to discover. Many of you on the spiritual path have already discovered this, and yet the egoic mind keeps coming up with imaginary problems, because that's what minds do. Most of these so-called problems have to do with the ego's desires. The ego has endless desires that feel very important and true, and not having these met seems like a real problem and cause for sadness, anger, or feeling bad about oneself. How dare life not fulfill my desires? Nothing ever works out for me. I'm just a failure. But often the only problem is that the ego's desires are unrealistic or not aligned with divine will, and how life is currently unfolding. The ego makes life all about itself, but maybe the time isn't right for something, or maybe it just isn't in the cards. So many things are just not under the ego's control. The ego doesn't believe and doesn't recognize that each moment contains whatever is needed for that moment, and that whatever life isn't providing isn't necessary at that time. There might even be a good reason in terms of one's soul's growth for something not being provided. Life has a plan for every individual, and the ego's desires often have little to do with that. If the ego were able to see that it doesn't need what it thinks it needs to be happy, there would be no problem and no suffering. But that is easier said than done. The ego is in the business of wanting things that are not showing up in life, and not wanting things that are showing up in life, and that's the trouble. It's a no-win situation, which is why the ego is rarely happy. Because the ego's problems are not real problems, the only real solution is to see this. Then, letting go of the particular desire that's causing the suffering and dropping into real life, which is unfolding exactly as it needs to, is possible. Unfortunately, most people aren't ready for such wisdom and such a solution, so they seek answers to their ego-generated problems from other egos or their own, and spend their time trying to get something they think they need to be happy. This striving to get, rather than receiving and fully experiencing what life is offering in the moment, and being grateful for that, for what is the disease that is the ego. Since there's no end to the ego's need to get more, for those in the egoic state of consciousness, life becomes all about getting. Their ongoing experience is one of never having enough and always striving for more. Their thirst is never quenched and their hunger never satisfied. This is the state most people find themselves in, and the reason so many are unhappy. If something isn't capable of making you happy for long, such as power, money, recognition, or material things, then getting more of those things is not the solution to making you happy. The answer is to go after what is capable of making you happy. Love and happiness can't be found in getting things, or even in getting love, at least not for long. Love and happiness belong to a state of consciousness that is only arrived at by letting go of the ego's perception that it needs to get something from outside itself to be happy, including love from others. The belief that happiness lies outside oneself is one of the lies that keeps people tied to the egoic state of consciousness. The truth is that getting what the ego wants doesn't get you what you really want: love, peace, joy, contentment, and wisdom. You may not be aware that what you really want is love, peace, joy, contentment, and wisdom. You might be very attached to what your ego wants. You really want power, money, recognition, admiration, security, comfort, or beautiful material possessions. Can you see that you want both what the ego wants and what your true self wants? The problem is denying that you want what your true self wants and focusing exclusively on what your ego wants. As I said earlier, what you focus on becomes magnified in your awareness. The ego's desires become bigger than life, quite literally. What if you focused on what is more real and true than the ego's desires? Love, peace, joy, contentment, and wisdom. What if those were your priority? You can still go after power, money, and the other things the ego wants, and your pursuit of these will be much more balanced and less selfishly motivated. There are many in your world today who have both wealth and love, who attained their wealth because they stayed true to love, joy, and their innate wisdom, They allowed themselves to be guided by something higher, and that resulted in an abundant life on every level. There are also plenty of examples of what it looks like when someone is driven solely by the ego's desires. Those individuals are not happy despite having what the ego wants. Why not learn from them? They are your teachers in this regard. What will it be? Will you be a getter or a giver? The good news is that if you choose to be a giver, you will also get great blessings from life, including possibly the things the ego wants. The same is not true if you choose to be a getter. That is a lonely and unsatisfying path, as anything you do receive from life will never be enough. Do you believe that it is more blessed to give than to receive? What you believe is important. The ego doesn't believe this, which is why this truth needs to be articulated. You have to be taught this, because your default is to believe the opposite. The ego laughs at this teaching. The ego is a taker, not a giver. To it, giving is a sign of weakness and weakens you. Giving makes the ego feel diminished, while amassing what it wants makes it feel good about itself. Too bad what it's trying to amass isn't love. The ego believes there's only so much to go around, which may be true of material things, but certainly not true of love. The ego is like a miser constantly counting his stack of coins to see if he's ahead in life or behind, as if life is a game of poker or Monopoly. The ego is afraid it will end up a loser. It assesses its winning and losing with measurable things, such as the size of one's bank account, the number of awards, the size of one's house, the expensiveness of one's cars and clothing, or the number of followers on social media. When I said it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God, this is the kind of rich person I was referring to. What I was saying then is what I'm saying here. The egoic state of consciousness, with its emphasis on accumulating money and things rather than cultivating love, makes it very difficult to discover that the kingdom of God is within you. This kingdom refers to your inherent divinity. God is within you. That subtle realm where love abides is where God abides within you. That love, that goodness, is God's presence within you. But of course the miser isn't interested in that. He's too in love with other things, things that don't satisfy. The ego definitely believes that it's more blessed to receive than to give, but the ego has it backwards. And when you believe something about life that isn't true, you will suffer, because that's how life teaches you the truth. When you don't go in the direction of love, you suffer. When you do, you don't suffer. Life is designed to teach love. Thank you for being here. I am with you always.